Okay, so as it's now 1:01, and some folks are here, let's start the session. So first of all, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our roundtable that is presented in collaboration with the Africa Center. And this session is entitled Enhancing African Canadian Capacity to Advance Human Rights and Equality, Lessons from a Project. Thank you so much for joining us. So just to let folks know that the session will be uploaded afterwards if you need to leave early or you would like to share the session with others afterwards. So just to let folks know, my name is Rose Eva Forks Jenkins, and I'll be doing the introductions before passing and on to Mansouri as the moderator. So just to let folks know, I work as a public educator and researcher at the Center for Race and Culture. I'll be monitoring the chat and Q&A today. So if you have any comments or questions, please type them into the chat. And then the Q&A will take place in the last 15 minutes of the session. So just type your questions as they occur to you, because I know I always have, if I try and remember a question for later, I'll forget. So just type it in now, and then at the end we'll do all that and we'll have the Q&A. So like I said, we'll be posting it afterwards. And if you would like to know where it's going to be posted and to learn more about our upcoming sessions, the best way to do that is to subscribe to our newsletter. So right now I will put the link to the newsletter for anyone that's interested to learn more about the center. And on the next slide, you have the our project poster, which you might have seen on social media, designed by the wonderful Mansouri. To let folks know about the session today. So how it came about is that for the past 3 years, the Africa Center has undertaken circles of conversation on racism and race relations across the province. The project included facilitating community dialogues to create a platform that enables healthy conversation about racism and experiences of discrimination. Series of community dialogues were convened in Calgary, Edmonton, and Fort McMurray, and the intent of these series were to create awareness, raising both among the Black communities and the mainstream community at large. So the Africa Center and Center for Race and Culture have partnered in this roundtable to inform the public about race relations and present some of the community experiences that have been collected through this project. And to let folks know that this project also was funded by the Human Rights Citizenship and Multiculturalism Education Fund. So thank you to our funders. And on our next slide, we wanted to have a land acknowledgement. So even though we're not gathered in the same physical space, and folks might be joining us from all over, we wanted to acknowledge the physical land that Center for Race and Culture and Africa Center occupy on Treaty 6 territory, traditional homelands for many Indigenous peoples. With this acknowledgement, we pay our respects to elders past and present who call this land home, and remind all of us gathered here today of the responsibilities we have as treaty people to understand our shared colonial history and work together towards a just future that includes and enriches all people. We also wanted to briefly mention another issue that Indigenous peoples are facing today on a different side of Canada. So there's been a lot of news coverage about the violence that Indigenous fishers are facing in Nova Scotia right now. So we recommend that you learn more about the situation from the Mi'kmaq folks themselves, to learn about their traditional rights when it comes to fishing and look at the best ways to support them. So in the chat, I'll drop a link to Maureen Gugu's independent news site. So Maureen is a person who's a member of the Sipa-Ganati band and who's Mi'kmaq. And so she has her own independent media company that you can follow to learn more about the situation. And I'll drop that in there. Okay, and then to let folks know about the Center for Race and Culture, so we were established in 1993, and we were formerly known as the Northern Alberta Alliance on Race Relations. And so we brought together diverse people with an interest in promoting and supporting individual, collective, and systemic change to address discrimination and racism and to encourage intercultural understanding. Taking an intersectional approach, our expertise spans workplace development, community building, research, and education. And if you'd like to learn more about current events, projects, or activities, please visit our website or sign up for our newsletter, which the link has been dropped in the chat there, but I can drop it again. And then to let you know more about our roundtable series. So on the next slide, you'll see kind of more about this. So the session is part of an initiative called Challenging Discrimination Through Community Conversations, an ongoing series of online moderated roundtables and webinars with guest speakers from diverse communities, organizations, academia, and the general public. So we seek to understand and address experiences of discrimination and exclusion in the Canadian context. And by shining the spotlight on different forms of discrimination, such as anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, and discrimination against different communities, among other topics, we hope to encourage solidarity among groups and individuals interested in promoting social inclusion and equity. And we wanted to let folks know as well on the next slide that this is a community-based initiative and we welcome ideas and suggestions for collaboration. So don't hesitate to reach out to my colleagues Mansoray and Miriam if you'd like to be part of future conversations. That's why we have their emails up there, so feel free to drop them an email. And we also, I want to take this time to take a quick poll. So if you could please answer these questions, it would be really helpful for us to know more demographic data about our participants. So we're asking these questions because race-based data is not always widely available, and this lack of data makes it harder to prove that systemic racism exists. So by providing this information, you'll help gain a more in-depth understanding of these concepts. And if you're not comfortable answering these questions, you can choose do not wish to answer. So thank you so much. Those questions will be up there for 1 minute. So we'll give you a chance to answer those.
So I realized that we can do it, eh? The panelists.
No, sorry, as panelists, no, sorry. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. And yeah, we really appreciate that data. That really helps us a lot. And so now we're going to introduce our participants, or sorry, our panelists, I should say. So thank you so much, all of our wonderful panelists, for being here. So Dunya Noor is the president of the African Canadian Civic Engagement Council. For the past 5 years, Dunya has been in a supervisory role, supervising a team that extensively worked with high-risk youth with complex needs and involved in the criminal justice system using the wraparound high fidelity model as a form of intervention. In her free time, Dunya prepares business cases, grant proposals, and logic models, as well as leading strategic planning, SWOT analysis, and program alignments for business owners and nonprofits. She has successfully advocated and collaborated with the provincial, federal, and city governments to make legislative and policy changes to reduce systemic barriers and historical barriers for African descended communities and new Canadian communities. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dunya. And then next up, we have Susan Cambridge. So prior to arriving to Canada, Susan's professional experience spans from 10 years in the airline industry, over 15 years in broadcasting, 5 years in the advertising industry, 14 years as a certified event manager, and 5 years as a manager of her own production company. Susan was the creator and producer of her own television program called Family Business is Everyone's Business, meaning that we're all attached to a family unit that extends into the community and the form part of the social fabric. Susan is the business owner, CEO of CAS Events Consultancy Limited, and she also offers services as event planning consultant and event host. And she's also been a volunteer on this project working with Catholic Social Services. And then next up we have Sharif Haji. So thank you so much for joining us today, Susan. And then we have Sharif. So before accepting the role of the Executive Director of the Africa Center, Sharif has worked with the Ministry of Seniors and Housing and the Ministry of Health for over 5 years. During his tenure in the public sector, he led and managed various provincial files, including implementation of the provincial affordable housing strategy, Alberta's primary healthcare strategy, and the design for the family care clinics. So thank you so much, Sharif, and all of our guests. And now I'll turn it over. Oh, wait, sorry. Then last but not least, we have Mansoure as our moderator. So to tell folks a bit more about Mansoure. So Mansoure has been an educator and researcher for over a decade and has worked in post-secondary sector and adult education, as well as in the public sector and community engagement programs. Her academic work is focused on transnational feminisms, intersectionality, community, narrative studies, and storytelling. She has designed, developed, and facilitated numerous educational programs for diverse audiences on topics such as gender and diversity inclusion, writing for academic purposes, and literary studies. Mansoure joined the team at the Center for Race and Culture in January 2020 as a project consultant and developing the educational resource, Gender Inclusivity in the Workplace, a Practical Guide. Currently, she's with the center in the role of educating and research programs consultant, and also coordinates the new initiative, Challenging Discrimination Through Community Conversations. And now I'll hand it over to Mansoure to moderate.
Thanks a lot, Raziva, and welcome again to our guests today. We're very happy to be hosting this session, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. So I will start with this question from Sharif. And we would want to hear more about the specific project that you've been working on, the reason why the center, the Africa Center, decided to undertake this project, and the timeline and goals of this project.
Thank you, Mansoure and Razi, for the great introduction and the start of the questions of this conversation today. I'll start with the Africa Center first. The Africa Center, its mission is to create opportunities for access and full participation of the African community in Alberta. So we do provide programs and services that promote inclusion, that undertake community empowerment, that preserve strong cultural heritage and appropriate integration processes. Our vision is a strong, relevant, and engaged African descent communities that are part of the fabric of Alberta's thriving population. So back to the programs and services that we undertake span from early childhood development programs all the way to programs that provide services to seniors who feel isolated or feel excluded. In terms of length of time that the organization has been functional and providing services to in Edmonton, is over for close to 14 years. And we have been successfully providing services that enhance a sense of belonging within the community. So this, coming back to the project, this project started in late 2017, and it was about a conversation that was going on in our province at the time. That was a time when there was a discussion, there is a need to do something around racism and race relations, or whichever terminology that you use. So this was the outcome of an acknowledgement of racism and race relations as a social issue within the community that a lot of African descent community have been raising, with the elected officials and with the existing institutions. So there was a recognition that the race and racism or race relations has a significant long-term social impact on our health and well-being, employment, justice, houses, mention it, every aspect of our social well-being. So as a result of that, the Africa Center and many other organizations, including Center for Race and Culture, have been doing some work around this area, which is what is the best way to tackle and advocate this social ailment, and make a change that informs a system change that promotes a sense of belonging for every Albertan. So since 2017, the Africa Center facilitated series of sessions, of community dialogues. And these community dialogues and sessions were intended, to recognize that racism as an existing issue among our society. And the intent was to provide a solution-focused platform where communities can have a dialogue and discussion and have a conversation. The second intent or objective of the initiatives, which received funding from Human Rights Education and Multiculturalism at the time, was identify mechanism to address the issue of race relations at the community level, knowing that race and race relations and racism has different layers at individual level and a system level. The intent was, what is it that the grassroots of impacted communities can do, and what are some of the solutions that they can bring forward? And then the other objective of the initiative was increasing a sense of understanding and promoting a sense of belonging. So it was an increasing, so how do we increase the knowledge and understanding of the community so that they do understand, yes, but there is always, you could understand but not have a solution, but you can also come up with a solution-focused conversation and then how address the issue in that. So these have been the intent and why this project came into existence, and it has been going on for a while until I will say last year. Part of my panelists, my colleagues who are part of this panel today, have been involved in facilitation of these conversations, and they will speak deeper into that. But mine was just to give that bigger picture and in terms of why it came into an existence and why it was these sessions were going. But while these sessions were going on, there has been an extensive movement in our province that needs to be acknowledged. That Anti-Racism Council was established at the provincial level, and that was as an outcome of acknowledging that racism as a social issue. At the municipal level, the same type of structures were created to address the matter. So this has been the movement that were going on in our province for the last 3 years to address these issues before the recent trend, which sparked again the issue and then revealed more underlying factors that we will be speaking to today in the conversation. Thanks, Mansouriya.
Thanks so much, Sharif. So now that we know a bit more about this project and about the goals and the reasons why the center undertook this, we'll move to question 2 that I will ask from our other guest speakers, Susan and Dunya. So tell us how participants were recruited for these community dialogues, the project, and if you have any demographic data to share with us from this project. So anyone who would want to go first, please.
Yeah, I can go first. So in terms of the recruiting process, it was through advertisement, also in-person conversations with community leaders, engaging youth group initiatives, and also just, taking it out there for the public to say, this is the event, these are some of the concerns, these are the objectives in which this dialogue intends to achieve, who would like to be part of it. So that was the recruiting process of it. In terms of some of the data that was gathered from the dialogue, On October 2nd, 2018, I had the privilege to facilitate a human rights workshop looking at effective ways of understanding discrimination and racism with Africa Center as their facilitator. The objective of this dialogue was, one, to enhance participants to locate themselves as a means of reflexivity and also empowerment. Two, to define racism as a process and continuum of a psychological and structural lack of access. Three, to employ exploratory examination through listening to storytelling, which is embodied in the culture of the individuals that have participated, and look at these stories from the lens of impact and experience of racism and discrimination experienced by people of African descent and their communities. Particularly, we looked at 4 main areas, which is education, law enforcement, incarceration, immigration, and employment. The reason why we looked at that areas is because there has been repetitive themes that people were submitting areas of concerns at an organizational level and also at a communal level, particularly issues with those 4 domains. With that being said, the 4th objective is that we also wanted to use this information gathered to inform ongoing research and to assess the needs of African Canadians, particularly living in Alberta. So that was the main objective of the research, the community dialogue. The key takeaways that we found and that we learned was through the community, the participants' responses. So I'll just give a concrete example. One of the questions that we asked is, what do you think of what does institutional racism mean to you? And what are some of the examples that you can reference in terms of your personal lived experience with institutional racism? Right away, participants addressed law enforcement and the experience of law enforcement at a personal level, meaning direct, they themselves or their families or someone near within their community experienced, or indirect, meaning they've witnessed it, they've seen it, or they've heard about it. One of the 4 points that they touched on was presuming guilty due to skin color, tendency of harsher penalties for Black Canadians, unforgiving court systems, and lack of court navigation experienced by Black Canadians, and carding and police profiling, which was the main concern. Right after that, the group naturally transitioned to healthcare and the experience of healthcare directly and indirectly. So one of the things that's been reported is the group stated that Black people there's a perception when it comes to the healthcare system that Black people have more pain tolerance, and the belief that leads, healthcare systems to treating Black people with low medical standards. And the concern around that is the dehumanization and objectification of the Black body, and how the healthcare system is not inclusive, and it impacts people of African descent all the way through their medical treatment. Then the 3rd one was education and the experience of being part of the public or private schools in Alberta. So the group has shared, and by the way, it was a lot of in-depth confirmation. So what I did with my co-facilitator, Foma, is we just put it in themes in terms of a lot of the repetitive themes that kept coming back and forth, which was the feeling that we don't exist and that the physical space that we are learning from is not a place that is safe, and the feeling of being invisible. Also, the criminalization of Black children in schools and receiving very harsher punishment. And there was a lot of reference of the prison to pipeline framework in terms of how a lot of young people at a very young age are socialized, and they internalize, this whole concept of the Black body being a criminal. And that, unfortunately, what we found is that communities didn't have a lot of things to navigate or bridge this concern. Also, very low expectations with little to no encouragement in terms of school performance. That was a significant concern. We also asked, how does psychological racism manifest in prejudicial thinking, and how does that look like to you? So what a lot of people stated is criminalization of children of color and harsher punishment and racial profiling seem to be a very continuous pattern, and then lower education in academic performance in grade school all the way to post-secondary institution. Now, the lower expectation did not only include from an academic standpoint in terms of grades, but it also included access to opportunity, extracurricular activities, encouragement, tutor. A lot of that was not presented. What made the circle very powerful, what made the circle particularly powerful is there was 2 generations that were together that was talking about this conversation, which was the younger post-secondary students, some students that were also in high school, including the elder generation. So their experience, unfortunately, a huge concern was how did 3 different generations experience relapse? So that was a big paying attention to. Then we asked about interpersonal racism. And we framed it in the sense that interpersonal racism, how it looks like, what is it? And we gave it in-depth analysis to all different types of attitudes and definition and white dominance in the society we live in and what that looks like. Statements were definitely expressed regarding doubt about ability. It came back to professional and training experience. And also overpricing of real estate to keep Black people out. So a lot of Black people a lot of the elders and young adults shared the experience of not having opportunity or program initiatives or encouragement or even access to information regarding real estate. Also, all non-Black communities expressed upheld anti-Black racism. And also, a lot of people said that they need to practice respectable politics to prove their human integrity, and that sometimes it's very hard for them to address that. These are significant concerns and these are areas of improvement we need. And the respectable politics, it was addressed in the sense of employment, that when it comes to any sort of employment violation, there's not much that can be put in place in terms of addressing it or reporting it or even putting a formal complaint. Even though the process is there's a threat in terms of losing job opportunity or credibility. Then we asked in terms of what strategies have you successfully used to encounter racism in your life? And that was very fascinating because one of the things that both my co-facilitator, Ufoma, and myself have in common is that we are both anti-oppression practitioners. And what we realize is that a lot of times when we continuously engage people in narrating their lived experience of racism, sometimes although we are trying to gather stories and assess impact, however, there's unintended harm that can be done in terms of re-traumatizing the individual. So what we've planned to prevent that in place is that let's also talk about it from a lens of empowerment and also a lens from, as Sharif was saying earlier, a solution-based dialogue as well. So when we asked what are some of the strategies that you've that used to address racism and cope with racism, community participants that included both young people, elders, and post-secondary students stated that events like this, having space for us, by us, and what that meant to them is Black-led organizations are the ones that are receiving funding to host these type of activities, and it's individuals that look like us and have similar parallels of racism and structural violence are part of the facilitation. So that was their safety aspect, which was cultural safety. The second one was strategies to encounter racism was education. They stated that workshops, conferences, access to resources, access to information was very important. Also engagement with post-secondary education, because there seems to be a significant gap and it's a very scary world, especially when there's not a lot of access of mentorship there or role models. Youth empowerment groups, school outreach, leadership programs, mentorship programs was expressed by the youth. Through culture, watching, learning from other community members, particularly the role of elders, healthy elders that really understand both African Indigenous knowledge and also a lot of the, at a Canadian context as well. White responsibility to change the system of oppression. So a lot of people stated that, you know, they feel that they are burdened with, although they are the recipient of racism, they're also expected to address and do something about racial structures. And they feel that what true allyship means is organizations, structures, institutions, and people in positions of power, particularly that may embody white privilege, to take personal responsibility to do something about it. We asked a question regarding the government. What can the government do? What can the government of Alberta do to ensure that, you know, there's equitable, safe, healthy communities? There was 2 responses, and the first one was disrupt pushback, red tapes, and interpersonal interactions that leads to conflict. The second one was creating our own spaces of institutions and other places of power so that there is not constant dependency for the government to take initiatives to make the society a better place for us. The third, we also asked, how might we support one another in these areas, and what does support look like to strengthen community resiliency and solidarity? Participants stated identifying formation, strength, and self-actualization. So cultural identity was a significant component to overcome racism and discrimination. Overcoming stigma, shame, trauma, and creating an initiative, creating safe spaces that accommodate these conversations in a way that's proactive rather than reactive, and open-minded, and a place that has no judgment or persecution. Then we also asked, what could we do to improve inclusion and participation, which Sharif said was the vision and mandate of Africa Center in terms of participation in the economic, political, and social life of society. And what are some of the tools that we can use for the community's voice to be heard? And also, what can we implement? And this is where Africa Center leadership specifically stated that this is a strategy that we want to understand what our community thinks. So some of the things that we received back as a feedback was talk to mainstream societies, including white people and other groups, ethnocultural communities, about the experience of anti-Black racism, and also raise awareness through education, empowerment, and awareness. A lot of the people in that group, some of them were first generation Canadians, second generation, and third generation. And what they stated is that we are all immigrants to this land, and there was a strong recognition of First Nations, the idea of reconciliation, and a solidarity to First Nations groups, and therefore that we all need to acknowledge that we're all immigrants, and we need to share and live in a way that is peaceful and also just and fair. And then the other thing was systems to hold people accountable for maintaining or promoting, systems to hold people accountable, people that maintain or promote racist practices, attitudes, and some of the examples to push for our culture to be included in the educational curriculum. That was something that a lot of young people actually define as empowerment. They stated that the only time that they learn about what it means to be a person of African descent, African Caribbean or Black, is when it comes to only Black History Month, which is February. And even then, the way that it's taught, there's a lot of heavy language regarding enslavement, rather than how people of African descent contributed to civilization and the diverse cultures that are within that community. Other examples was they spoke about allyship and what that means. And allyship means giving back to communities that are marginalized, that are very susceptible to a lot of vulnerabilities, and giving back in a way that is freely genuine and sincere. Promoting culture in the wider community, promoting groups and welcoming groups of new Canadian Black individuals, establishing community support systems. That was very important when it comes to crisis or hate crimes. Education, so educating our communities regarding healthcare issues was a significant one. So the idea of health constantly came back over and over again, such as the healthcare field, mental health as a general, and the experience of health for gender, like what young Black women face, and the over-sexualization or the harm that young Black girls go through. Also, support for families and children with school. So there was a lot of recommendations for communities, not only to advocate for changes in terms of the School Act, but directly to go in those schools and offer mentorship programs, leadership programs, offer translation programs so that children can stop being criminalized. That was my concise way of explaining what we heard.
Thanks so much, Dania. Very, very informative demographic data. And it's of course disheartening to see that experiences of discrimination are happening at such a scale now based on the data that you receive. But at the same time, it's very informative, and it gives us an opportunity to think about what we can do regarding that, right? Thank you. Susan, would you like to add something to this question, to answer this question?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mansoure. That was really informative, Donia. And while you were talking, I kept reflecting on my personal experience, because from my neck of the woods, being a much smaller town and being in the border city, my contributions would probably lead to a more personal experience on the ground, talking one-on-one with people. So this whole concept of racism, and especially as referred to Black in the community. When I first came here, I hardly saw Black people. I just wondered where they were, what they were doing, why they didn't come out. And soon I quickly realized that they more or less kept to themselves. They kept to themselves. They didn't really come out much and mingled within the community. So I found that rather strange. However, my way of really getting involved very much was through volunteering, through Catholic Social Services, where they engage a lot with the newcomers. So we're talking about racism here, on a general basis, not just Blacks alone. So I had the opportunity to speak with a few of them and understand how they feel when they first come as immigrants, and, you know, the pressures of being able to fit in, you know, and go through the whole process of employment or the lack thereof, you know, healthcare, quite a few of the things that Donia spoke about. So I got involved in a lot of forums where people volunteer their personal thoughts, how they felt and stuff like that. And coming out of that, I also felt that there was a need to bring harmony amongst all immigrants. And so while different organizations or different cultural groups found themselves celebrating or sharing concerns separately, I found through events and stuff like that, one of them being Lloyd Fest, that we should really bring all cultures together, share food, culture, experiences, and so on. Which brings me to 2019, when I first engaged with the African Center to support the pre-launch Lloyd Fest, and how we could go about getting people to talk about racism, minorities, and how they felt. And so we decided to have a picnic whereby we invited a couple groups, you know, smaller groups and Filipino groups. We had the indigenous families, as well as we joined with the Destiny House, which is a church predominantly of African descent. And we all came together, shared food, had some fun games and activities, and literally talked about it. You know, how they felt, they were treated, some of the concerns, and what it was like to just be in this small space and share and talk together. And a lot of them expressed the emotion that it was a good feeling. It doesn't really happen often. You don't really see all these cultures coming together, having a picnic, talking about their experiences, how they feel, indigenous people, and so on. So that worked very, very well from that level. And then I was also involved in another forum where we partnered with the Lloyd Mintz Immigration Partnership, the city, the Native Friendship Center, and we had a workshop which through the Kairos blanket experience. And of course, that was another one geared toward understanding the explore the nation-to-nation relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people of Canada. And we again involved different members of the community from different cultural backgrounds to share that experience. And some of the things that came away from members on that panel, as it referred to racism, and I'll just share some of the quick messages coming out of that forum. And one said, our communities and all they hold are changing rapidly, yet our needs for belonging, safety, and inclusion are timeless. Share the concept of small action and big impacts in our lives on a daily basis. And another one said, pre-immigration experience of refugees and the process of integration in Canada while facing common barriers like housing, language, employment, education, and finances, personal challenges, mental health issues, cultural differences, and being a potential target for racism. And these were just key things that were shared among the panels, and the panels involved African members of the Muslim community and Indigenous. Another one expressed the power of diversity in helping make organizations more competitive, and stronger organizations need to work harder on issues of inequality and capture human potential rather than looking at, at race issues. And one who wrote many books, author of many books, says that love is the answer and love is the key to success. And within the Muslim community, they are saying that love all and hatred for none. Now, bearing in mind that these key things that people are taking away with affects all of us. And so being on a border city as well, I'm also involved as a member of the board on the Multicultural Council of Saskatchewan. And in conversations and educations, we have platforms and forums treating with racism, and they have indicated from information and statistics, of course, that there are four forms of racism that people relate to. Structural, cultural is the established hierarchy of groups based on perceived race. The hierarchy was created designate superiority to one group in order to benefit oppression and exploitation of other groups. White supremacy is the foundation that influences systemic, interpersonal, and internalized racism. Systemic institutional racism is prejudice and privilege embedded in the policies, practices, and programs of systems and institutions, including in the public, private, and community sectors. And when we think about it, you talk about, in having these discussions, you would hear people talk about how Black people would wear their hair, whether it's poofy, whether it's dreadlocks, and you do come across some objections because, it seems not to be conforming to the norm. Individual or interpersonal racism as the beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors of individuals based on bias, stereotypes, prejudice, be it conscious or subconscious, internalized racism. We absorb the culture, racism, ideas of the racial hierarchy, and accept inequity as normal. People targeted by racism come to believe that the stereotypes and prejudices of racism are valid. Racism intersects with other oppressions, including gender, sexuality, faith, age, ability, class, etc. Now, it's all well and good for a lot of us to, or for some people would have said that, we talk a lot about it, but a lot of people would like to see action. And these are people that on the ground, we form groups, we have coffee, we sit and we talk, They would like to see a lot of action, more things being put into place so that people don't have to feel the effects of racism. And I mean, I would like to come in straight here on a personal level, that when I came and I decided that I wanted to have this event, Lloyd Fest, and really bring all people together in a 2-day event of celebrating cultures, music, fun, everything that you could think about. One of the questions that came to me was, why? I mean, it's not like we don't celebrate diversity. Different groups have different things happening throughout the year, you know? Why this desire to bring everyone together? And I was like, well, why not? Why not? You know, what is wrong with all these groups coming together, sharing experiences, sharing the same space, and sharing the same pride in celebrating their heritage, you know? And I don't know, I get the feeling that there was a concern of the collective coming together. I don't know why, but it was really, really a struggle to try to prove that there's some good that can come out of this. And of course, fast forwarding, long story short, having done an event in 2019 and in 2020 in midst of COVID, my sheer determination, the fact that I was a bit vociferous, I really came out and was really leading the forefront of this event. And not just to say that I want to have a community event, but the whole idea of acceptance and the fact that I wanted to do it, being who I was a challenge for a lot of people to accept. And I'll tell you where this conversation went to amongst people now. Okay, Susan, so you're doing this event. Great, it has value, etc., etc. But you're getting such a struggle because you're the face of this whole thing. Maybe you need to step back and give another face the forefront. And that's a very potent statement, simply because being Black, I've gotten a lot of flack for taking the forefront of trying to do something like this that will do well for the community in terms of maybe lessening racism, showing more of cultures and diverse heritage coming together, people celebrating together, breaking language barriers and everything else. And here am I being told, your struggle has been so difficult, Susan. Maybe it's because you need to take a step back because you're Black and give someone else the forefront. And so, having said that, I came to the realization that the struggle is real, but here it is once again. Why should I have to do that? If it is clear that people are realizing that it's because of who I am, I may be getting this kind of hindrance or opposition. Why should I have to step back? And these are some of the real issues here, because this amplifies itself in your workplace, in trying to get ahead, housing, health institution. It ties it all back to what Donaire has said and the reasons that Sharif has given, why it is we take the necessary steps and have the conversations. But suffice to say that we are having the conversations and that we are pursuing, and that we need to really use our experiences as empowerment and continue to pursue. I don't think that I'll be looking backwards anytime soon. I think that I will definitely be going forward and continue to pursue harmony, continue to pursue strength, continue to take weaknesses as learning lessons, but by all means, continue to celebrate our contributions as Black people in the community, continue to support each other, and continue to look at the global picture, what it is, what it feels like to be a minority or to be part of of considered immigrants coming to Canada, and how can you make a difference, still retain your heritage, your culture heritage, still continue to be part of that, blend in, fit in, and just progress and do well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan, for sharing. And as you said, the struggle is real, right? And we're having these conversation, you know, roundtable after roundtable, and we're hearing these experiences and ideas from different communities in our province to just learn more about these experiences that a lot of people of color are experiencing across the province. But at the same time, it shows us how powerful these spaces can be, right? The spaces where individuals can connect people coming from different experiences, right? So it feels to us right now so far away from the idea of being able to take part in festivals, right? One of my favorite ones in Edmonton has always been the Heritage Festival, where you get to see a glimpse of different cultures and learn about them and connect more. But nowadays, we're hoping that these online forums could, in a way, help these conversations grow and become stronger, and so we can learn from each other's experiences. Thank you. So moving from this question to the third one, we know that these sessions were convened in Edmonton, Calgary, and Fort McMurray. And as you said, Susan, part of it was in Lloyd as well. So what was the logic behind choosing these cities specifically, and how did you manage to make those connections with the community organizations? And tell us about the challenges that you experienced, and also about any next steps that you envision coming out of this project. So anyone who would like to go first? Susan, yes, please, you can start, and then we'll move to Sharif and Dunya.
I think I'll give Dunya a chance on Sharif now that I've just come out of my
I'll jump in. Thanks, Mansoura. The sessions were convened in Edmonton, Calgary, and Fort McMurray. As Susan mentioned, there was a session also in Lloydminster, that was integrated part of the festivals that were happening in Lloydminster to do some of those conversations. The identification of these areas were just mainly based on the presence of the Black populations. Those are the most, in our province, those are the three cities that has more African descent populations. And the idea was to bring together to these community members and, as I said in my previous, earlier, set a stage where a solution-focused conversation can happen. So we thought that there would be more people who would be able to come, who could express their experiences and have a conversation that will inform some solutions. So basically, this was why these have been identified, and I will also speak to some of the I've spoken to some of the facilitators. This was before I was working with Africa Center, but I was able to talk to some of the facilitators who did the facilitation in other locations. Their feedback and what they heard was similar to what you've heard from Susan and Dunya. So there was no much of a difference in terms of their experiences of what they heard from the communities. I will only add one of the facilitators, some comments that he heard from the participants of the discussions, was a sense of despair. There was kind of like, well, this existed forever, it will be there. we can talk about it, but the actions that Susan was talking about will be impossible, almost. So let's talk about it. It serves as a therapy, sort of. We can talk about it, we can share about it, we can discuss about it. But in terms of whenever it was brought, we want a solution-focused discussion, there was a sense of, no, I'm not that hopeful. It's going to be there for a while, or it's going to be there forever. So that was one of the pieces of additional information that I have heard from some of the other facilitators, but the rest were consistently the same as Dunia and Susan mentioned, that a lack of a systemic change. When something happens, yes, there will be reaction because of the public will react. Albertans, Canadians are wonderful people. It doesn't speak to the values of Canadians. People will react, they will be disappointed, and public elected officials will speak about it because of the public is reacting. But if it is the other form, as Susan was talking about, the structural one, or if it is the systemic one, you don't realize, you don't see it, but it has far impact than any other form of racism or race relations social impacts. So, and this is not only Canada, this is everywhere. The only thing is that in Canada until recently, we don't have much information to show. We don't have much information to share about it, to speak to it, to inform policy changes, because we don't collect necessary information. And I think this will be, it's not in the question, but I think I will be very interested that that aspect of the discussion to be brought to the panel discussion, and so that they can, Dunia, I know, has been involved some of the work that was happening around data collection related stuff, and also Susan as well. So we can discuss further on that. But I just wanted to highlight saying that, yes, there is despair. Yes, there is some sort of feeling that it is the system, it's entrenched in the system, and there's nothing that you can do. It's going to be there.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe we can turn to Dunia for some additional thoughts on this.
Absolutely. I agree with everything that Sharif touched points on. For me, what was very interesting as the president of the African Canadian Civic Engagement Council is we just conducted a groundbreaking research regarding the experience of COVID-19 and Black communities, and how COVID-19 significantly impacts the health and economic outcome of Black communities. Now, just thinking in from a reflective point of view, I facilitated the conversation with Africa Center October 2nd, 2018. And a lot of the theme that we have found in our national study end up being the same. And the national study actually ended up coming from Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Alberta, Saskatchewan. And we did the study, specifically the study was designed to look at the perceptions of Black Canadians and the broader Canadian population regarding the direct health and economic impact of COVID-19 in Canada's Black community. Although a lot of, we saw a gap that although a lot of service provider agencies and hospitals, particularly in Ontario, are stating that they are collecting race-based data, we found that there's a significant barrier in terms of disaggregated data regarding the experience of Black Canadians. The reason why we took on this initiative is similar to the dialogue that happened with Africa Center 2018, which is to help improve the quality of life of all African Canadians, and also to increase awareness and understandings of the unique challenges that African Canadians face. What we actually end up doing is we did a national survey of a sample of 2,230 people, because we do believe that data-driven decision-making is the heart of policy, programs, initiatives, allocation to resources. in our community, we are storytellers, and just like Susan was saying, we love sharing, we love gathering. It's therapeutic, it's healing. But at the same time, what happens is when we talk about the idea of race and racism and race relations, a lot of people actually end up leaving there, like Sharif was saying, feeling very traumatic and oppressed and powerless. So what we did decide to do this time is go through a community-based research. Interestingly, the research found so many different things, but I just want to highlight 3 things that the African Canadian Civic Engagement's national research found regarding Black Canadians and COVID-19. Number 1 was, compared to the average Canadian, Black Canadians report far worse health outcomes related to COVID-19. Black Canadians are more likely to report COVID-19 symptoms, either themselves or someone they know, and they're more likely to seek out treatment for COVID-19, and they're nearly 3 times more to report knowing someone that has died from COVID-19. So that is significant, back to what Susan was mentioning in terms of the mental health aspect. The second finding was, although further research needs to be done, because what we did is we just scratched the surface, is that poor health outcomes for Black Canadians may be explained to the greater exposure of COVID-19. And what does that mean? A lot of Black Canadians reported that they feel that their jobs requires them to work with individuals and society face to face. Black Canadians are more likely to feel that no matter what steps they take, their day-to-day routines puts them at an unfortunate risk catching the virus. Black Canadians' commutes, such as their public transportation and how they get to work, are more likely than the national average to report symptoms and also treatment of COVID-19. Black Canadians' commutes are also twice likely than the average Canadian workers to say that their commutes is unsafe. And this might be because Black Canadians who Black Canadians who commutes to their work are also twice as likely to use public transit than the average Canadian. The third point that we found is Black Canadians report worse financial impact from COVID-19 than the average Canadian. And when we went into depth, what we found is, just to highlight 2 points, that Black Canadians are more likely to report layoffs, reduce working hours of their household, and they're more worried over the coming up few months of how they're going to pay for their rent, pay for groceries, and cover their children or their family's expenses. The second point that we found is Black Canadians are also more likely than the average Canadians to say that their household finances have negatively been impacted by COVID-19. And when it comes to age and gender, it's Black men over 45 years of age who are most negatively impacted by COVID-19 when it comes to the household finances. Again, what we found to be very fascinating is I've had the privilege to facilitate a conversation with the Africa Center on October 2nd, 2008 regarding race relations, health, justice, education, employment. Now, that was clearly, when it comes to data or from an examination lens, it was limited to Edmontonians, particularly from African descent communities in Edmonton, Alberta, that were hosted by the Africa Center. Now, 2 years goes by, we do a national study that covers Toronto, Montreal, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Vancouver, all of the 4 main largest cities, Nova Scotia, that there's a lot of high prevalence of Black communities. And we find exactly the same thing. So what does this mean for Canada? And what does this mean for Alberta? And what does this mean for Edmontonians?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Dunya, for sharing. Those were very astonishing statistics, specifically because we had a discussion in our last roundtable regarding the same issues, how in a way the immigrant population in general have been affected by COVID-19. And we're also hosting another one with the Statistics Canada in our next roundtable. So this was very, very informative as well. Thank you. Before we turn to Susan, I would like to let our audience know that there is a feedback form that we would like to remind you that we will share in the chat box for you to access and fill out regarding this session, or in general if you have comments for us. The other thing is that you can post your questions and answers in the chat box or the Q&A section as we are moving to the rest of the conversation. And depending on how many questions we have, we will give 10 to 15 minutes to Q&A. All right, Sharif, I think you needed to add something, and then we'll need to turn to Susan. Yeah.
Yes, Susan, you want to go first?
You have the floor already. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to emphasize the aspect of data-driven knowledge and information when it comes to the social inequity in relation to race or racism. If you want to look in globally, we live in a globalized world. If you look at globally, the most countries that has the worst situations of race relations include Brazil and South Africa. Not race relations, but let me put it differently. Countries that has completely different races that are living together. And when you look at Brazil and South Africa, those are two countries that are what they call BRICS, which are the following back of countries' economic development after the G7. So very good in terms of the trajectory in terms of economy. However, global index shows that those two countries has the highest inequality in the world. So it tells you about the issue of race and how the impact that it has on the society. So coming down to, as I said previously, Canada has not been collecting information on that or not sharing such an information. But recently, there has been a lot of attractions on this, as Dunia was mentioning. So I just wanted to re-emphasize that. In February 2020, there was a Start Canada report that themed Canada's Black population, education, labor, and resilience. Please and please and please read that report. I will share it on the link, and I will encourage you to read that before you come to the next round when Start Canada is presenting here. It will be fantastic. So in July, Start Canada started collecting data of unemployment on a race base to show how different racialized populations and unemployment are. So I think they have released the first one last month. So it'll be interesting to go and read that as well. Last week, Public Health Agency of Canada released a report that's called Social Determinants and Inequities in the health sector for Black Canadians. Read it. It shows a significant gap between Black populations and the rest of the society. This has a significant impact on our systems. At the end of the day, we will pay it. It's like in terms of to remedy it or address it, those gaps, it will be taxpayers who will be paying it. So you have to, as a society, it's a decision to be made that we want to pay upfront, address those inequities and reduce the social problems, or we want to pay it later on, whether it is through the healthcare system, through the justice, through the other avenues that will have to pay it in a remedy way. So I just wanted to emphasize those. I will share some of those links on the chat, but please read. Data speaks itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, these were very informative statistics that we can consult. Very good observation. Thank you. So let's turn to Susan to add any thoughts to this question.
Well, my thoughts, having heard all that has been said, and especially the last point that Sharif just made, and the statistics and the gaps and everything. But you know, as Black people, specifically, I'm talking about Black people now, that in everything, we have resilience to find opportunities. And while we wait for systems and policies to change and stuff like that, I believe innately we are people who resilient and find a way to make things happen. COVID-19, in all its despair, forced people to be absolutely creative, bring out all their entrepreneurial skills, connect, get information, collaborate, and do whatever it takes to survive. Whether it be that you have to think out of the box, whether it be that you have to do your research, find resources, look for opportunities, funding wherever it is, while we wait for policies, procedures, and so on, things to change, because it is important for those things to change to stop some of the systemic racism. I'm also employing and I'm also seeing that we do have what it takes to survive and make things happen and make that change, as well as success stories. The more that it's been highlighted and the more that that is pushed to me, the more that we see success rather than despair, I think is a way to go, because young people are generally looking for that ladder, that success, that ladder of succession, right? Whereby they look for people that they can emulate from or learn something new and stuff like that. So I think in whatever your small environment is and whatever is going on, continue to push through the struggles, because that is what you have to do sometimes to break barriers and to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And I found that even though within my situation here of struggling to do this, and I'll tell you, I see the bigger picture of this event not just being a fun thing in the summer, but to turn some of the economic wheels. Because if you have a flood of people come into a city, thousands of people come into flock a small city year after year, and it's getting bigger and bigger, what is going to happen? The money's going to come here, the money's going to stay here. You know what I mean? So have the vision and continue to push, but seek the opportunities, right? Be creative, and like I say, collaborate, and look, because now is the time. It's happening. You see where things are happening that are forcing people to work towards something. You have data, you have statistics, you have all of that. But mobilize yourselves and move in a direction that you can still see the horizon in the despair. So it's a mind thing now that we have to change our cultural mindsets and work through the positives and continue, and I'm saying it again, continue to highlight the successes of the struggles, so that we are convinced, so that you can share with other people who seem to think that there is no way of change. Change will come, but if we stop, if we rock back too much, sometimes we have to be the movers and the shakers. Sometimes it takes a minority to change a majority. But let's not shift our eye from the goal. While there is a lot of seemingly noise, despair, distraction, let's continue to be focused.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. Very important points, very empowering in a way, as we would want to always acknowledge those struggles and discriminations and all those experiences, but at the same time focus our energy to what we can do to change it, right, as a collective, to value these experiences and learn from them. Thank you, Susan. So our fourth question is about the importance of carrying out such projects. And I think that in a way, many of you suggested why these projects have been important, why they were carrying out these experiences. But anything that you would like to add, specifically probably with thinking about moving forward, right? The next steps that could be taken, moving on from what Susan was talking about. I think that would be a great way to sort of conclude our session.
Great. So I guess I can add from my perspective. My professional and personal opinion is when we're talking about racism and discrimination, it has to be very well defined for the purpose of intentionality and what we intend to do with the information and what population are we addressing. With that being said, I think the issue particularly experienced by a lot of Black communities is when it comes to racism and discrimination, that we are just lumped with the idea of immigrant or immigration. And often we don't focus on what it means to experience anti-Black racism from an intersectional lens, being a person, you know, being Black or being a female and then being a newcomer or living with disabilities. It's a lot more different. So I think we don't do justice when we lump the idea of race relations and racism to this thing of multicultural. I think it depends the intent in what we are achieving, particularly when I focus on the adverse experience of Black communities. Black refugees that come from Africa, they have a lot of pre-migration trauma. Black settlement communities that live in Canada and the United States as well, they have a lot of historical trauma. And the experience is very different. And anti-Black racism, equivalent to Indigenous issues, is an huge international issue. So my recommendation at a policy level for governments, including community organizations at a grassroots level, is that when we come to this conversation regarding race, what communities are we addressing particularly? Because lumping all the communities will really not give justice. Each community have their own, unique challenges and barriers in which they need to navigate. And I think it's very important to distinguish that. The second component is at the same time, when it comes to Black communities, I feel that anything that and this is my personal and professional opinion as an anti-oppressive practitioner with a social work experience that also looks strongly at policy analysis, is that when we're talking about anti-Black racism, which is also my background expertise and lived experience, is that Black-led communities and Black individuals should be the ones that are leading this dialogue and making this effective change. Black communities, like Susan was saying, I 100% agree with Susan. We have cultivated resiliency and a historic way of helping one another and helping society and contributing to civilization. Black people do not need to be saved, they just need to be given opportunity. And what true allyship means is to make that space and allocate the appropriate resources to people that are very full competent of doing the work. At times, mainstream organizations that state that they are for race relations will also perpetuate various of different structural violence towards Black communities. Sometimes you will see funding go towards non-Black organizations solving Black mental health issues. And you see Black communities very much overstretched, overworked, underpaid, have no resources. And that's at a communal level. At a policy level, when it comes to addressing anti-Black racism, it does not mean professionality is very different than lived experience. So we need Black folks that not only have the academic professionalism, the expertise, but also they understand what it means to live and carry the Black body. So as an anti-oppression practitioner, as a facilitator, as someone that has been working in the criminal justice system and serving youth and rehabilitating youth and domestic violence issues over 12 years, I think it's really time for Canada to start talking about anti-Black racism. I know Justin Trudeau has addressed that, the Declaration of Acknowledgement of African Canadians, and I know that the government of Alberta is starting to do that work. But for me personally, and this is my opinion as Dunya Nur, the true acknowledgement of race and race relations is giving individuals and communities, particularly from that particular community, the opportunity to facilitate these conversations and push for policy. The savior complex is very dangerous. It takes away spaces, it takes away resources, it takes away a lot of supports, it takes away empowerment, and it really does a lot of unintended harm. And that's where I would like for us to start looking at things.
Thank you. Sharif, would you?
Yeah, I will leave most the remaining time for the participants for questions, but I'll just add one more thing. Yes, we've heard in 2017 and 2018 despair, but we've also, as Susan was saying, we have also seen in the midst of COVID, the number of Albertans that gathered in every city in Alberta, particularly in Edmonton, during the midst of COVID with the Black Lives Matter movement. So 90% of the population is that I saw there. I don't have a concrete statistics, but young population. So there is definitely hope.
Very good, thank you. There is actually one question from Raziva. So this question is for Susan. And so based on what you were suggesting, she's asking, what can we do as people living in larger cities in Alberta to help folks face discrimination in similar cities, such as Lloyd, for example?
Well, I think we have to really maximize the use of technology right now. And you have limitless opportunities via these webinars and being able to have these face-to-face interactions. And sometimes I think these webinars are even more up close and personal than if you were in a huge conference hall where no one will actually be able to read between your eyes. Continue to mobilize these webinars, have the discussions, but by all means, when you have discussions, consider the solutions. No sense walking away from any kind of consultation or any kind of forum and you're not moving forward with a solution that has a timeline to be activated. I think so many times we have discussions, they talk and they sit on the shelf. So mobilize, get together, talk, use the technology and activate. Activate. I think that's the key thing there. You have a lot of resources at your disposal. Many people in different organizations are there for you. Get a database and make sure you have those things at your fingertips. That will help so that when you come together, that database is being shared. Because many times, at least I have learned, that there's so many different forums that I didn't have access to. Let us have a database that Blacks can get their hands on, so to speak, a huge database. And out of that, you can have these forums, and then where you'd be specifically probably looking at different organizations that will appeal to the thing that you want to discuss. But by all means, access it, use it, activate it.
Right. Yeah. Thanks so much, Susan. So there's another question from Micah for Dunya specifically, but anyone who wants to chime in, they can as well. So Micah is asking, where do you find the strength to stay strong in your leadership position? And so someone in your position in this place, what advice would you give someone whose position in leadership is being questioned based off of who they are and how they look like, what they look like?
Yeah, Well, I could share some of the strategies that really did work for me is to be a visionary person. And no matter what society throws at you, you have to form your own circles of individuals that you can turn to. I personally have very strong mentors and coaches that are there for me anytime, every time, 24 hours. I wouldn't have been able to do the work that I do without them. A lot of them are the matriarchs of our communities. They're not afraid to hold you accountable, redirect you, question you, but at the same time provide you opportunity of learning. Authenticity is something that is very important. Be yourself and give yourself the permission to be authentic. You don't need to apologize for being authentic. I know that sometimes I'm in spaces that, you know, you see a young Black woman that's Muslim and from a refugee family, and the way I talk and my critical analysis really insults people and makes them feel uncomfortable. And that's okay. I would advise to hold space for that individual. That's where they're at today. I've also learned the hard way that sometimes people project their own emotions of insecurity. Really does not have anything to do with your leadership. However, if one's leadership is being questioned, typically what I've seen in the past is two things. Is there something that you need to change within your leadership? And are these some of, you know, is it done in a way that's constructive? And is it really a matter of, and who's it coming from? Or is it destructive? And is it because you are being targeted? I think you really have to separate that. For me, if I have any sort of constructive feedback, I definitely utilize that. I take time to reflect on that and I sit with that. However, if it's destructive due to racism, gender violence, Islamophobia, anti-Black, I just figure out ways to cleanse my body. I also wanted to conclude that I started meditation not so long ago, and it really is very powerful. So I hope at least that's my limited knowledge and experience and some of the strategies that I employed.
Thanks so much, Dunya. So any additional thoughts? Sharif, would you like to add anything? We have 2 minutes left.
Yes.
And yeah.
It's a good question. And yeah, stay strong. Don't tell yourselves that you can't lead. As a young person, you have the right to be given the chance to lead if you have the potentials. And this is where the issue of race and racism at the systems level comes in. That you find some people are given the opportunity to lead because they have the potentials, not the experience, but the potentials. And some people are asked because they don't have the experience. So, and this is where the unfairness comes in. As a young Black person, I will say, or as a young person of color, I will say, yeah, push the boundaries, step to the territory that you don't feel you don't belong, you do belong. Step in there and then challenge it. You will get the reward. If you don't, then you won't. Nobody will come and say to you that you deserve this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks so much to everyone who joined this discussion, to our guest speakers in specific. We're very happy to have been able to host this session, and we're looking forward to staying in contact through our future roundtables. We're at 2:30 mark, so I would like to remind everyone to please take a few minutes and fill out the feedback form that is shared in the chat box with you, even if you don't have the time right now. If you can just click on the link which is shared and keep it in your browser. We all know how busy we can be during the day, anytime that you got a chance. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening, and tune in for our next roundtable.
Thank you
Yes,
so
thank
much.
you so much.
Thank you.